Okay, let's unpack this. You've brought us some really fascinating source material here. It's a deep dive, really, into industrial and organizational psychology.
That's right. It's all about understanding people at work, but the sources really frame it within these huge global shifts happening right now.
Exactly. We're talking massive changes, the fourth industrial revolution, 4IR, the huge rise in virtual working, and importantly, how this all plays out specifically in South Africa.
Yeah, the context there is critical.
So our mission in this deep dive, and this is tailored just for you, the listener, is to kind of cut through all the complexity, grab the most vital nuggets of knowledge from these sources.
And give you that shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on it all.
Basically get to the core of why these changes matter for people and for companies, all seen through that IO psych lens.
Precisely.
All right, let's jump straight in with the big picture. The sources remind us work's always been fundamental, right, to human life.
Absolutely. It's evolved massively from, basic survival needs to the formal paid work most of us recognize today.
And it's not just about the money. It's crucial for satisfying all sorts of needs, physical, financial, yeah, but also emotional, social.
And it underpins the whole economy, societal well-being. It's foundational.
And that evolution, it's definitely not slowing down.
Yeah.
Which brings us right to the fourth industrial revolution, 4IR.
Right, or Industry 4.0. The sources use them interchangeably, basically describing this huge wave of influence from new tech on, well, everything. Society, workplaces, jobs, productivity.
It builds on the last digital revolution, the third one, but there's a key difference highlighted from Klaus Schwab's definition in the sources.
Yeah, he talks about a fusion of technologies. That's the key word.
A fusion.
Meaning's blurring the lines between the physical world, the digital world, even the biological sphere. Think about it. Billions connected on mobile devices, plus AI, robotics, biotech. It creates possibilities we couldn't even imagine before.
And the list of these 4IR technologies in the sources is, well, it's long.
It really is. Digitalization, VR, AI, robotics, 3D printing, quantum computing, cloud computing, bio and nanotech, genetic engineering, IoT, big data, 5G, other smart tech.
The crucial bit from a psychological angle, though, is how these aren't just tools. They're fundamentally changing how work gets done.
Exactly. And how organizations are structured, how people interact within them.
Which leads straight to a core insight. This tech is incredibly disruptive.
Yes, very disruptive. It means some jobs are lost, and that's a real fear highlighted in the sources.
But like previous industrial revolutions, it also creates entirely new kinds of work, new opportunities for prosperity, potentially.
Right. The sources stress that digital work specifically changes processes and organizational structures. It's a deep shift.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting and maybe a bit concerning, the fear.
Yeah, the sources absolutely highlight significant fears. Things IO psychology really needs to engage with, like rising inequality. That's a big one.
The potential for work becoming dehumanizing, fewer jobs overall, traditional careers just vanishing.
And that fundamental question, how do humans compete with machines that are getting smarter and smarter?
And the impact isn't the same for everyone, is it? The sources make a really clear distinction here.
Definitely. Routine jobs, think construction, manufacturing, call centers, they're much more vulnerable to automation.
Compared to jobs needing those higher level skills.
Exactly. Advanced cognitive skills, creativity, critical thinking, and crucially, social skills. People management, emotional intelligence, complex judgment, decision-making, negotiation, cognitive flexibility, those are harder to automate right now.
Which puts lower skilled workers at much higher risk.
It does. And the sources argue this puts a massive responsibility on organizations, on governments, to invest in developing the right skills for this new era.
But there's a catch noted, right? Many organizations maybe aren't doing enough yet.
That's the challenge mentioned. They're not quite keeping pace with the changes needed for workforce readiness.
And looking specifically at South Africa, the sources say the 4IR impact is visible in, say, government strategies, some business practices.
Yes, like the government's 4IR forum. But actual implementation, still quite limited, apparently.
And there are real doubts raised. Can South Africa realistically adopt 4IR rapidly, given, the economic challenges, the high unemployment?
Yeah, those are serious questions. And the fear that these changes could just make existing inequality even worse. That's a major concern discussed in the material.
And then just to add another layer of complexity, COVID-19 happened.
Right. The sources are clear. The pandemic was a massive accelerator. It pushed digital transformation, 4IR applications, and especially virtual working forward at incredible speed.
Which brings us neatly to our next big topic, the rise of virtual working.
Yep. The sources define it pretty straightforwardly. Spending work time outside a traditional office, home, a remote hub, a coffee shop. Often no need for that central office space anymore.
Meetings go online, everything shifts.
Exactly. And it's not brand new, is it? The idea's been around since the 80s. Telecommuting, working from home.
But the evolution is key. The sources trace it from basic phones and email,
Through better connectivity with mobile and internet.
right up to using all those 4IR technologies we just talked about.
And it's more than just where you work. The sources call it a new kind of employment relationship.
How so?
Well, you see more hybrid models. It requires a different mindset away from that office anchor. And we're seeing more full-time remote roles, part-time contracts, a lot more freelancers.
Okay, that must have huge implications for management then.
Absolutely. The sources highlight the need for totally new strategies. How do you monitor people effectively? Train them? Develop careers? What about work ethics, leave, and crucially, well-being?
Monitoring seems like it could be easier electronically, maybe.
It might seem that way, but the sources really push back on that. They strongly emphasize shifting the focus. It shouldn't just be about monitoring time or activity.
But about performance outcomes.
Precisely. It has to be about trust and results, not just bums on seats or keyboard tracking.
And there are definite plus sides mentioned. Cost savings seem big.
Yeah, for the company, less office space needed. And for employees saving on travel costs, time.
It can genuinely improve work-life balance, flexibility, makes work more accessible for people with disabilities too.
All true. But the sources are also very clear about the downsides.
Like what?
Limited personal interaction, those water cooler moments disappear. That can lead to isolation, feeling neglected by the team or managers.
And the boundaries, work and home life blurring together.
That's maybe the biggest one. If it's not managed well by both the organization and the individual, it can lead to serious well-being issues. Depression, stress, overwork, burnout, work-family conflict.
So the takeaway is, remote working isn't automatically great. It needs real planning and management.
Absolutely. From everyone involved.
So looking ahead now, beyond the 2020s, the sources seem to say change is the only constant. Employees have to accept and prepare for it.
Yeah, jobs are becoming more mobile, maybe shorter-term projects, career paths are way less predictable. That job-for-life idea is long gone for most.
Which points to a massive need for individual adaptation, right? Self-management.
Totally. You have to be more proactive, more creative in finding opportunities, take ownership of your career, meaning sustainability, success, through constant learning and renewal.
And the sources list key traits for employability in this future.
They do. Things like entrepreneurial skills, creative thinking, flexibility, being internally motivated, and just that readiness to adapt. Constantly adapt.
And they talk about different career streams emerging.
Yeah, 4 potential ones. Traditional organizational jobs will still exist, sure. But alongside them, free-floating professionals, consultants, entrepreneurs, the self-employed, and this big group in flexible careers, lots of changes, different projects.
That flexible model seems key for adaptable people.
It really does. It links straight into the gig economy concept the sources mentioned.
Right, where employers create non-permanent project-based work.
Exactly. It fits perfectly with those newer career ideas, boundaryless careers, protein careers that emphasize flexibility and change over stability.
The sources then get a bit speculative, exploring different future work scenarios.
Yeah, which is interesting. One vision is less hierarchy, more task-based teams focused on innovation. It needs strong social skills, emotional intelligence, transparency, and a real focus on well-being.
Another sounds maybe less positive. A powerful corporate world using big data.
Right. Potentially providing services governments do now, like education or health. It might create jobs for the super talented, but maybe with less focus on broader social responsibility.
Then there's a scenario emphasizing social and environmental responsibility.
Yeah, pushing for lower prices through efficiency, transparency, fair regulations, environmental care, flexible hours, kind of a conscious capitalism model.
And a final one focused heavily on human value.
More idealistic, perhaps, focusing on the intrinsic meaning of work, strong employee relations, ethics, fair wealth distribution, though maybe more dependent on external funding sources.
So what's the point of exploring these different futures?
Well, the big takeaway is that each scenario implies different needs. The training and skills required for IO psychologists and HR folks will have to adapt dramatically depending on which way things go. The field itself needs to be relevant and flexible.
Which leads us perfectly into the heart of it, psychology itself, and specifically IO psychology. Now you, the listener, probably know the basics of psychology.
The scientific study of human behavior, mental processes, feelings, thoughts, actions, and context focus on the individual but also their social world, and applied science.
Right. So where does IO psychology fit?
The sources position it as an independent applied field. Related to general psychology, it's mother science, as they sometimes say, but it's developed its own theories, concepts, practices, while still drawing heavily on psychology, of course.
And the core definition they provide.
It's the scientific study, understanding, and facilitation of employee and organizational behavior in workplaces, applying psychological knowledge to boost both performance and well-being.
So IO psychologists are basically psychologists, but specifically in the work context.
That's a good way to put it. And the sources really stress its scientific nature.
How so?
It uses rigorous scientific research, basic research for theory, applied research for practical problems. It follows that scientist-practitioner model,
Meaning?
meaning you need both research skills and practical application skills. You have to understand the science and be able to apply it effectively. And it contributes back to the science through publishing research, like in the essay Journal of Industrial Psychology mentioned.
Okay, so it has a clear identity. Independent science and practice. Scientist and practitioner.
Exactly. And while IO psychology is the preferred term internationally, the sources note that in South Africa, industrial psychologist is still the official registration title. You also hear work psychology used more now.
There's criticism mentioned, isn't there, particularly relevant to South Africa?
Correct.
About relevance.
Yes, that's a crucial insight from the sources, significant criticism, concerns about a historical Western bias in the training, in the theories used, and a strong call for indigenization.
Africanization, making it truly applicable here.
Precisely. To serve South Africa's diverse contexts, and Africa more broadly, effectively, the field needs to connect better with the lived realities here.
So how do the sources suggest it becomes more relevant, beyond just changing theories?
They emphasized becoming more evidence-based, yes, but specifically more responsive to the socio-political realities and urgent needs in South Africa.
Like unemployment, health system challenges, education issues.
Exactly. Massive societal problems. The sources argue IO psychology has to find ways to contribute its expertise meaningfully to these issues, not just stay within traditional corporate boundaries, applying its principles to the real problems faced by most people.
That makes a lot of sense. And structurally, how is it governed in SA?
The sources detail the main bodies. The HPCSA Health Professions Council of SA regulates all health professions. Underneath that, the PBP Professional Board for Psychology specifically governs psychology training, practice, registration, and so on.
And professional societies.
Yeah. IAPSA for IO psychology, SNSA for psychology more broadly, and the SABPP is mentioned too, the SA Board for People Practices. That's a non-statutory body, more for HR practitioners.
And the sources distinguish different registration levels, right? Psychometrists, counselors, professional psychologists.
Yes, and then the separate SABPP HR registrations. That distinction is important because it dictates professional standing and, crucially, scope of practice.
Scope of practice, like who can do what.
Exactly. It clarifies who is legally authorized to perform specific psychological acts in South Africa. It's a key legal point.
Okay, let's zoom in then on the specific areas IO psychology actually covers, the subfields and practice areas.
Right. The sources list the main ones. IO psychologists can be generalists, but specialization definitely happens. These subfields are like the different toolkits they use.
So give us a flavor. What's organizational psychology about?
That looks at the whole organization as a system, the individuals in it, the groups, the structure, the dynamics. The goal is to help employees be satisfied, productive, well-adjusted, and help the organization run efficiently. Especially, as the sources note, during times of big change, like 4IR, change and transformation are key focuses there.
Okay, that's the big system view. What about focusing more on the individual employee?
That's where personnel psychology comes in. Historically, this was industrial psychology. It's all about individual differences and using that understanding for decisions about employees. Think assessment, selection, placement, promotion, training, motivation, rewards.
Sounds like it overlaps a lot with HR.
Huge overlap with human resource management, talent management. IO psychologists often advise HR managers and specialists in these specific areas, bringing that deeper psychological understanding of individual differences.
Given everything we said about unpredictable careers, career psychology and counseling must be vital now.
Absolutely essential. It studies career development planning, adapting to change, dealing with employment or unemployment. The sources really stress its importance in helping people build that flexibility, that entrepreneurial mindset, the self-management skills needed today.
And they mention adapting it for SA.
Yes, specifically noting the need to incorporate indigenous knowledge and methods here, so the career guidance is truly effective and relevant in the South African context.
What about when things go wrong between people at work? Conflict, unions.
That falls under employment relations. It's about the behavioral dynamics, communication, conflict management between employees, unions, employers, even government. You need good legal knowledge here, too. Specialists often facilitate negotiations or immediate disputes.
And underpinning all this is the science part.
Right, research methodology. Like any science, it's about finding, exploring, verifying knowledge systematically, but specifically psychological knowledge in the work context. Research is seen as a core skill for all IO psychologists, back to that scientist-practitioner idea.
You mentioned assessment earlier. That's its own thing.
Oh yes, psychological assessment or psychometrics, a major field, developing and using tests, questionnaires, other tools to measure psychological attributes or behaviors for selection, counseling, training needs. You name it.
Okay, with cautions.
Big cautions, especially in diverse places like SA. The sources hammer home the need to consider cultural diversity, context. Ensuring tests are valid, reliable, and fair is critical. And remember, psychological assessment is legally a psychological act needing that professional registration.
With all the pressure and change, employee and organizational well-being must be huge.
Increasingly critical. This field studies what helps or hinders performance by looking at workplace health, psychological and physical. It involves evaluating health risks, managing issues, promoting well-being proactively, facilitating resources like EAPs, employee assistance programs. It's a recognized practice area in SA, and demand is growing.
And in a diverse country, or even globally, culture must be central.
Definitely. That's cross-cultural IO psychology, studying how culture, language, norms, values, beliefs shapes behavior and relationships at work. It covers research within cultures and between cultures, hugely relevant to those debates about Africanization and indigenization.
And diversity management.
Essential for that, yes. And for understanding how technology lands differently in different cultural contexts, it requires cultural competence, understanding yourself and others.
What about the physical side, how people interact with machines, desks, the environment?
That's ergonomics, also called human factors engineering, designing work, tools, environments to fit the person. It covers technical, physical, social aspects, including health and safety. It's very multidisciplinary, obviously super relevant now with all the human technology interaction in the 4IR.
Lastly, the sources mentioned consumer psychology. Seems slightly different.
It does, yeah. It studies the psychology behind consumer choices, needs, values, interests, influencing buying decisions. Can involve looking at brain processes in marketing. But the sources suggest it's valuable internally, too, like for understanding customer service behaviors. Maybe even an integrative theme for IO training.
And all these different areas feed into diversity management.
Exactly. The sources frame diversity management as flowing from understanding these cultural and cross-cultural dynamics, managing differences, gender, race, ethnicity, age, sexual orientation, etc. It's been historically neglected, and challenges around inequality and discrimination persist everywhere, especially in SA.
Why is effective management so important?
Well, beyond just legal compliance, the sources argue it improves team performance, boosts creativity, and can foster a more compassionate workplace culture.
Okay, so pulling this together, what does an IO psychologist actually do day to day, and how do they fit alongside, say, HR practitioners?
The official role, based on bodies like PVPHPCSA, is applying psychological principles to help well-adjusted people perform optimally and maintain wellness at work. Their actual tasks span all those subfields we just covered.
Assessment, recruitment, training, counseling, change management. It's a long list.
It is. Group facilitation, performance appraisal, industrial relations, organizational behavior analysis, OHS, quality of work-life planning, job analysis, mentoring, consulting, even advising on pay and benefits sometimes.
It really does sound like massive overlap with HR functions. The sources show tables comparing them, right?
They do. Functions like job analysis, recruitment, selection, compensation, training, performance management, employee relations, compliance, talent management, OHS, change management. They appear in both columns.
So, and it seems like a really crucial distinction the sources make. What is the difference?
It's vital, yes. The sources are crystal clear. IO psychologists are professionally registered psychologists. That means specific postgraduate master's or doctorate-level training, and importantly, registration with statutory bodies like the HPCSA via the PVP.
Whereas HR practitioners
Are highly skilled, often have HR degrees or qualifications, but are generally not registered psychologists. They manage the employment management side, the day-to-day running of HR functions, the processes, the operations.
But the key legal bit is the psychological acts.
Exactly. Only registered psychologists are legally allowed to perform things defined as psychological acts in South Africa. That includes psychological assessment tools, providing therapy, formal psychological counseling. HR can't do that.
Got it. So the IO psychologist brings that specific, deep psychological knowledge, the scientific underpinning, and the authority to perform those specific acts. They provide evidence-based support to HR and management.
Precisely. They bring the scientific understanding of why people behave the way they do at work and how to facilitate positive outcomes based on psychological principles.
What about career opportunities? The sources seemed cautiously optimistic, especially for SA post-COVID.
Yes, they suggest prospects are growing. The job types obviously map onto those subfields and tasks. Qualification and registration level determines the job level. It's rated well as a career in the U.S., and some SA research hints at encouraging demand now.
But they circle back to those South African challenges again.
They do. High unemployment, governance issues, slow adaptation. These are real barriers. But the sources kind of flip it.
How so?
They suggest these very challenges are where IO psychologists can potentially make the most difference. Their skills in change management, skills development, career counseling, conflict resolution, stress management. These are desperately needed to help navigate SA's complexities and contribute to broader societal well-being, not just corporate profit.
Okay, we've covered a lot, the big picture, the future, the field itself. To wrap up this deep dive, let's just briefly touch on the history. IO psychology didn't just appear out of nowhere.
No, it has roots in general psychology, but also its own unique path, shaped by big world events. The early days saw experimental psychology emerge with people like Wundt. Then you had Taylor's scientific management focusing purely on efficiency.
And Münsterberg applying psychology to work.
Right, seen as a founder. And even early psychometric testing happening in SA with Malherbe back then.
The world wars were huge catalysts, weren't they?
Massive. WWI and WWII created a huge need for selection, testing, managing morale. Really boosted the field.
And between the wars, we got the really crucial Hawthorne studies.
The ones showing social factors mattered.
Exactly. The importance of human relations, group dynamics, the famous Hawthorne effect. This era also saw key SA institutions founded, like the NIPR, which later became part of the HSRC.
And after WWII, the field became more established, specialized, more focused on social aspects. Governments brought in more relevant laws. The name officially changed to IO psychology in the U.S. SA universities started their first IO departments, PhDs. Psych societies evolved here too, more integration with other fields, and importantly, starting to consider culture and cross-cultural research.
And then modern times, say, post-1994 in the SA context.
Characterized by huge tech leaps, virtual work growing, positive psychology influencing things. In SA, continued evolution and sometimes tensions in professional bodies like PSA and PSA. The sources show big research growth in SA in core areas like personnel psych, organizational psych, assessment, well-being, maybe less in others.
Then the current context.
Still shaped by ongoing government legislation and massively impacted by COVID-19 and the 4IR, all reinforcing that constant need for practice be relevant, multidisciplinary, and multicultural.
Wow. It's been quite a journey we've traced, from those massive, sweeping changes of the 4IR and virtual work.
All the way down to the specific history, the different subfields, and the absolutely critical role IO psychology plays, or could play, in making sense of it all, especially here in South Africa.
It really underscores, doesn't it, how vital this kind of expertise IO psychology-informed HR is for helping people and organizations actually navigate these incredibly fast technological, social, economic shifts.
Couldn't agree more. The sources make that very clear.
Absolutely. So to leave you, our listener, with something to really think about, building on everything we've discussed, considering South Africa's unique and, frankly, tough challenges, the high unemployment, the urgent need for psychology to be more relevant, more indigenous, truly inclusive.
Yeah, those are the big questions.
Exactly. So the final thought is, how can IO psychology best use its scientific foundation, its practical skills, to genuinely move beyond maybe traditional roles and contribute to equitable well-being and effective work for all people in this diverse, rapidly changing environment?
That's a significant challenge, but also a huge opportunity for the field. Definitely something worth mulling over.